She's still breathing. She's still breathing. God said she's still breathing. The 8-year-old's scream shattered my funeral like a gunshot, and before anyone could stop her, my hand twitched inside the casket. I'd been declared dead for 3 days, autopsied, prepared for burial, hours away from being lowered into the ground. But that little girl in a pink dress heard something no one else could hear, and what she said next exposed a conspiracy that went all the way to the man holding my eulogy. Because I wasn't supposed to wake up, and the people who tried to bury me alive were standing right there at my graveside. Before I go any further, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about survival. It's about what happens when you get too close to secrets that powerful people will kill to protect. So stay with me. Because if an 8-year-old had the courage to speak up, you can have the courage to hear what really happened. Now, do me a favor and click the subscribe button and hit the like button as well, and let me know where you're watching from. That would be nice. And I appreciate you for doing that. Thank you very much. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Patricia Monroe, and if you had told me 3 weeks ago that I would be conscious inside my own coffin, listening to my daughter sob while my nephew planned my estate, I would have called security to remove you from my building. My life wasn't just successful, it was untouchable, or at least, that's what I believed. I built my late husband's real estate company into a global powerhouse, controlled more money than most small nations, and shaped the world from behind closed doors. But I made one mistake. I discovered what was hiding in my own empire. 3 weeks before that funeral, I sat in my penthouse suite overlooking Biscayne Bay, holding an anonymous letter that would sign my death warrant. 8 words, printed on expensive cardstock. You're not safe in your own empire. I should have been afraid. Instead, I called my lawyer. Because Patricia Monroe didn't run from threats. I built my empire by facing them head on, by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than any competitor who dared challenge me. My late husband left me a real estate company. I turned it into a dynasty that stretched from Miami to Dubai, from luxury high-rises to political influence that moved elections. But in my 63 years, I'd learned one truth above all others. The higher you climb, the more dangerous your own circle becomes. And I was about to learn just how dangerous. The Monroe estate sat on 3 acres of prime Miami Beach real estate, a sprawling Mediterranean villa with enough marble to build a museum and enough security cameras to rival Fort Knox. I'd bought it cash after my husband Marcus died, a monument to everything we'd built together. Now, looking back, I realize it was less a home and more a stage where everyone around me played their carefully rehearsed parts, including the people I trusted most. It was a Tuesday evening when I first noticed the discrepancy. I'd been reviewing quarterly reports in my study floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic, a glass of Chateau Margaux breathing on my desk when a line item caught my eye. $20 million. Transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under a subsidiary I didn't recognize. Helios Capital Group. I'd never heard of it. And I knew every shell company, every subsidiary, every financial fingerprint in my empire. I picked up my phone and called the one person who should have answers. Andre, I need you in my office. Now. 15 minutes later, my nephew stood in my doorway, his PR-polished smile already in place. Andre Whitfield had been with the Monroe Group for 8 years. Marcus's sister's boy, sharp as a tack, cautious to a fault. He handled our public image like a chess game, always thinking 3 moves ahead. Aunt Patricia, it's almost 9. What's the emergency? I turned my laptop toward him. Tell me about Helios Capital. His smile flickered. Just for a second. But I'd built my fortune reading faces, and Andres told me everything I needed to know. I'd need to check with accounting. Don't. I stood, circling my desk like I used to circle boardrooms before hostile takeovers. $20 million doesn't just disappear into a company I've never approved. So either you know what this is, or someone's moving money without our knowledge. Which is it? Andre loosened his tie. Leo set it up 6 months ago. He said you'd approved it for international expansion. Leo, the name left my mouth like poison. Leonard Franklin, Marcus's best friend since college. The man who held my hand at my husband's funeral and promised to honor his legacy. The man I'd made chairman of my board because I trusted his loyalty. The man who apparently thought I was too old or too stupid to notice when he played me. Get Leo here tomorrow morning, I said, my voice cold enough to frost the windows. And Andre? If you knew about this and didn't tell me, we're going to have a very different conversation about your future in this company. He left without another word. I should have called my lawyer that night, should have frozen those accounts, launched an audit, protected myself, but I'd spent 40 years being the smartest person in every room, and pride, my eternal weakness, made me believe I could handle this internally. Pride, I would learn, can get you killed. The next morning, my daughter arrived before Leo did. Danielle Pierce walked into my breakfast room wearing Dior and exhaustion in equal measure. At 34, she'd inherited her father's bone structure and my business mind, but somewhere along the way, she'd lost the fire I'd tried to pass down. We talked like diplomats, instead of family, polite, measured, always maintaining distance. Mother, she kissed my cheek without warmth. Andre said you wanted the executive team here? I wanted answers. I poured her coffee she wouldn't drink. Did you know about Helios Capital? Her perfectly maintained composure cracked. The offshore account? I saw it in the reports last month. I assumed you'd approved it. Everyone assumes I've approved things I've never heard of. Interesting, isn't it? Danielle set down her cup. For a moment, just a flash, I saw something real in her eyes. Concern, maybe even fear. Mother, if Leo's moving money without authorization, then he's either stealing from me or hiding something from me. Neither option is acceptable. The sound of footsteps interrupted us. Leo Franklin entered my home like he owned it, which I supposed he thought he did. At 70, he still carried himself with military precision, silver hair immaculate, Italian suit pressed sharp enough to cut. His cane was pure affectation. The man hiked 5 miles every morning. Patricia, his voice was warm honey over ice. Andre said this was urgent? I didn't offer him coffee. Sit down, Leo. We need to talk about where $20 million of my money went. His face remained perfectly neutral. That should have been my first warning. Innocent people react. Guilty ones perform. The Cayman subsidiary? That's for the Caribbean Development Project. I sent you the brief 3 months ago. Show me. I'll have my assistant forward. Show me now. Leo pulled out his phone with the patience of a man explaining arithmetic to a child. He showed me emails, projections, architectural renderings for luxury resorts across the Caribbean. Everything looked legitimate. Everything had my company's fingerprints on it. Everything felt wrong. Who else has access to these accounts? I asked. Just myself and the accounting team. Why? Patricia, if you don't trust me to... Trust isn't the issue, Leo. Transparency is. From now on, every transaction over 5 million crosses my desk before it clears. Understood? The warmth drained from his face. Of course, but I'd seen it. The flash of something cold and calculating behind his eyes. The same look Marcus used to get when someone threatened his empire. Leo left an hour later, all smiles and reassurances. Danielle lingered, her concern finally breaking through her carefully constructed walls. Mother, be careful. If you're right about this. I'm always right about money, darling. That's why we're rich. She touched my hand, the first real affection I'd felt from her in years. I'm serious. Some things aren't worth dying for. If only I'd listened. That afternoon, the letter arrived. Hand-delivered by courier, expensive cardstock, no return address. 8 words that would haunt me. You're not safe in your own empire. I stood in my penthouse, letter trembling in my hands, the Miami skyline blazing gold in the setting sun. My chest tightened. Not from fear. I'd faced down corporate raiders and corrupt politicians without flinching. No, this was something else. My heart, racing, stuttering. The room tilted. I reached for my desk, for my phone, for anything. And then, the world went black. I wasn't there when they found me. That's the strange thing about dying, or almost dying. You miss your own discovery. I learned later that my housekeeper, Rosa, came in with my evening tea and found me collapsed beside my desk, the anonymous letter still clutched in my hand. She screamed, called 911, performed CPR until the paramedics arrived. But by the time they rushed me to Mount Sinai, my heart had already stopped. Cardiac arrest, they said. Sudden. Tragic. Not uncommon for a woman my age under stress. The autopsy took 6 hours. The death certificate was signed by morning, and Leo Franklin made sure I was scheduled for burial within 72 hours. She would have wanted it private, he told the funeral director, his voice heavy with manufactured grief. No spectacle, no media circus, just family. Danielle never questioned it. How could she? Her mother, the woman who'd built empires and commanded boardrooms, was gone. She spent those 3 days in a fog of Xanax and expensive wine, moving through the arrangements like a ghost herself. I would have been disappointed in her weakness if I'd been conscious enough to witness it. But I wasn't dead. I was trapped. Somewhere between life and death, consciousness flickered like a candle in a storm. I could hear voices, feel movement, sense light and shadow. But I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't tell anyone that something was terribly, horrifically wrong. They call it locked-in syndrome in some cases. A prison where your mind remains aware but your body refuses to respond. I don't know if that's what I experienced, or if something else, something darker was at work. All I knew was that I could hear them planning my funeral while my heart still whispered its stubborn rhythm. Andre was the first to notice something was off. 2 days before the burial, he stood in Leo's office at Monroe Group headquarters, holding the death certificate like it was evidence in a trial. The autopsy was rushed, Andre said, his PR instincts screaming that something didn't add up. And look at this, the pathologist's signature, Dr. Raymond Chen. He's not even on staff at Mount Sinai anymore. He retired 8 months ago. Leo didn't look up from his computer. He came back as a consultant. Patricia deserved the best. But why the rush? Florida law allows up to 10 days because I knew Patricia. Leo's voice carried the weight of decades. She hated pageantry. She would have wanted this quick and quiet. Are you really going to dishonor her final wishes by playing detective? Andre felt the words like a slap. He'd been raised to respect his elders, to trust the family hierarchy. Leo had been a fixture in his life since childhood. Uncle Leo, who taught him to play chess, who got him his first job at Monroe Group. So Andre folded the death certificate, tucked it in his jacket, and swallowed his suspicions like bitter medicine. But he kept the certificate, just in case. The morning of the funeral, 2 people arrived who barely registered on Leo's radar. Elise Collins stepped out of a modest Honda Civic, holding the hand of her 8-year-old daughter, Amara. They were distant family third cousins twice removed, the kind of relation you invite to weddings and funerals out of obligation and then forget existed. Elise was quiet, mousy, the kind of woman who apologized for taking up space. She'd never been to the Monroe estate before, never attended the lavish parties or business galas. Patricia had sent Christmas cards with generic signatures and never thought twice about it. But Elise was Marcus's blood, distant as it was. And Leo's assistant had added her to the list because it looked good, showed the Monroe family valued even their most remote connections. No one expected what Amara would bring with her. The little girl wore a soft pink dress that stood out against the sea of black like a flower in a graveyard. Her hair was pulled back in neat braids, pink ribbons tied at the ends. She looked like any other child at a funeral, uncomfortable, confused, probably bored. But from the moment she stepped onto the grounds, something shifted. "Mama," Amara whispered, pulling on her mother's hand. "Why is everyone sad if she's not really gone?" Elise shushed her. "Baby, please, not now." "But she's still waiting. Can't they hear her?" Other mourners began to notice. Whispers spread. Who was this child? Why was she saying such strange things? Danielle, fragile and hollow-eyed, turned to look at the little girl in pink. For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or warning. "She's just a child," someone murmured. "Doesn't understand." But Amara kept staring at the closed casket on the hill, where white roses had been arranged in perfect symmetry, where my body lay in state under a pristine white tent. "She's waiting for someone to listen," Amara said, louder now. "She said someone made a mistake." Elise grabbed her daughter's shoulders. "Amara Collins, you stop this right now. That's disrespectful." "But Mama," God said. "Not another word." Leo watched this exchange from 20 feet away, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. Andre stood beside him and for the first time in 3 days felt the hair on his arms stand up. Something was wrong. He'd felt it with the death certificate. He'd felt it in the rushed burial. And now this child, this strange, determined little girl, was saying things that made his blood run cold. But what could he do? Patricia Monroe was dead. The autopsy confirmed it, the state certified it, and in less than an hour, she would be lowered into the ground. The funeral director approached the family. "It's time for the final viewing." This was the moment. The last chance for family to say goodbye before the casket was sealed forever. Danielle moved forward on trembling legs, Andre supporting her elbow. Leo remained composed, commanding, playing his role perfectly. And Amara, little Amara, in her pink dress, broke away from her mother and ran toward the casket before anyone could stop her. "Wait!" she cried. "You have to wait!" Security moved to intercept her, but Danielle raised a hand. "Let her go. She's just a child." They opened the casket. I lay there in my regal golden kente cloth, my face serene, my body perfectly still. The makeup artists had done their job well. I looked peaceful, dignified, like a queen in state. But inside this prison of flesh, I was screaming. The mourners gathered close. Danielle wept. Andre closed his eyes, whispering something that might have been a prayer. And Amara stared at me with eyes too old for her young face. "She's still breathing," the little girl whispered. No one heard her. Not yet. But they would. The wind picked up just before Amara screamed. I remember that detail with crystalline clarity, the way the Miami breeze suddenly gusted across the cemetery grounds, rattling the tent poles, sending rose petals skittering across the manicured grass. The way it caught the edge of my golden kente cloth and made it ripple like I was breathing. Because I was breathing. The mourners stood in their perfect semicircle around my casket, a wall of black designer suits and dresses, expensive sunglasses, hiding tears that were only sometimes genuine. They'd positioned themselves by hierarchy. Leo closest to the head of the casket, Danielle at my right side, Andre hovering protectively near his cousin. The more distant relatives and business associates formed the outer rings, present because absence would have been noticed. And then there was Amara. The little girl in the pink dress stood at the foot of my casket, separated from the adults by invisible lines of social protocol and childhood insignificance. Her mother, Elise, had tried to pull her back into the crowd, but Amara had planted her feet like roots growing into the earth. She was staring at me. Not at the casket, not at the flowers, not at the weeping family members. At me. Her small hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. Her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, and her eyes, those impossibly large brown eyes, held something that made every person who glanced at her look quickly away. She looked terrified and certain. The funeral director began his closing remarks. Something about eternal rest and loving memories, the standard script that made death sound peaceful instead of permanent. Leo nodded along, his face carved from stone, his hand resting on his cane like a king with a scepter. Danielle sobbed quietly into a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking. Andre watched Amara. I could feel his attention on her, the way you feel someone staring at you across a crowded room. His instincts, those same instincts that had flagged the death certificate, were screaming again. And now, the funeral director said, we commit Patricia Eleanor Monroe to her final rest. No. Amara's voice was small but sharp, cutting through the formality like a child's cry in church. Every head turned. Sweetheart, Elise whispered urgently, reaching for her daughter. Please, not now. She's not resting. Amara's voice grew stronger. She's not dead. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone, one of the business associates, laughed nervously, assuming this was a child's confusion about death. Leo's jaw tightened, his composure cracking at the edges. Someone get that child away from here, he muttered to Andre. But Danielle held up a hand, her tear-streaked face suddenly alert. Wait. Amara took a step closer to the casket, then another. Her pink dress fluttered in the wind that was growing stronger, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. God said she's still breathing. The scream tore from her throat like prophecy, like judgment, like truth too big for a child's body to contain. She thrust her arm forward, pointing directly at me with a trembling finger. She's still breathing. God said she's still breathing. Chaos erupted. Mourners stumbled backward, some crying out in shock, others frozen in disbelief. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with something between hope and horror. Andre moved instinctively toward the casket, his rational mind fighting against what he was hearing. And Leo took a step back, his face draining of color, his knuckles white around his cane. Because in that moment, as 100 eyes turned to stare at my supposedly dead body, my right hand twitched. It was small, barely perceptible. Just my index finger, curling slightly inward against the white silk lining. But everyone saw it. Oh my God, someone whispered. That's not possible, another voice said. It's just muscle spasms, post-mortem. Her hand moved, Danielle screamed, surging forward. Her hand moved. Mama, Mama! Inside my prison, I was clawing toward consciousness like a drowning woman fighting for the surface. I could hear them now, really hear them. The volume had turned up from muffled whispers to full clarity. Danielle's voice. Andre's shocked breathing. Amara's small, certain voice still declaring the impossible. And Leo, backing away, saying something I couldn't quite make out. My chest rose, fell, rose again. Someone screamed. Andre grabbed the side of the casket, leaning over me, his hands shaking. Call 911, now! Get paramedics here right now! This isn't real, Leo said, his voice hollow. This is mass hysteria. This is... She's breathing! Andre roared at him. Look at her chest! She's breathing! Pandemonium consumed the funeral. Half the mourners rushed forward, desperate to see the miracle. The other half fled in terror, unable to process what was happening. Cell phones appeared, recording everything. Danielle collapsed to her knees beside the casket, reaching for me with shaking hands. Don't touch her, Andre shouted. Don't move her until paramedics. But Danielle was already grasping my hand, the one that had twitched, squeezing it desperately. Mama, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me. I tried. God, I tried. I poured every ounce of will into my fingers, fighting against whatever had locked me in this body. And I squeezed. Danielle's wail could have woken the actual dead. She squeezed my hand. The funeral director stood paralyzed, his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side. In his 30 years of conducting services, he'd seen grief take many forms. But he'd never seen a corpse come back to life. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Amara remained perfectly still at the foot of the casket, her small face serene now, as if she'd completed some divine assignment. Her mother clutched her shoulders, both of them crying, but Amara's eyes stayed fixed on me. "I told them," she said softly. "God said to tell them." The paramedics arrived in a blur of uniforms and equipment. They swarmed the casket, checking my vitals with instruments that beeped and flashed. One of them pressed fingers to my throat, feeling for a pulse. "I've got a heartbeat," he announced, his voice incredulous. "Weak and irregular, but it's there. How long has she been?" "3 days," Andre said, his voice breaking. "The autopsy was 3 days ago." "That's impossible," the paramedic said. "Check her pupils," his partner urged. "Check for brain activity." They shone lights in my eyes. I couldn't respond, couldn't track the movement, but somewhere in my trapped consciousness, I saw the light, felt it like hope. "Pupils are reactive. We need to get her to Mount Sinai immediately." They lifted me from the casket with practiced efficiency, transferring me to a gurney. The golden kente cloth fell away, replaced by sterile white sheets. An oxygen mask covered my face. IVs were started in my arms. Danielle tried to climb into the ambulance with me, but they held her back. "Family can follow in a separate vehicle. We need room to work." As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught one final glimpse of the funeral grounds. The scattered mourners, some filming, some praying, some simply staring in shock. The empty casket with its white silk lining, the roses trampled in the panic. And Amara, standing perfectly still in her pink dress, watching me with ancient eyes in a child's face. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sirens screamed to life, and Patricia Monroe, declared dead 3 days ago, raced toward a hospital that had already signed her death certificate. Behind us, Leo Franklin stood alone by my empty grave, his cane forgotten on the ground, his face a mask of pure terror. Because he knew what I would remember. And he knew that some secrets refused to stay buried. The video hit social media 17 minutes after the ambulance left the cemetery. Someone, a distant cousin with shaky hands and an iPhone, had captured the entire sequence: Amara's scream, my hand twitching, Danielle's collapse, the paramedics rushing in. Within an hour, it had been shared 10,000 times. By morning, the number was in the millions. Patricia Monroe miracle trended worldwide. The churches called it divine intervention. Pastor Williams from New Birth Baptist held a prayer service that night, declaring that God had sent a child prophet to declare his will. The Lord said, "Not yet." And who are we to question his timing? The Monroe Group's crisis management team called it something else entirely. "A rare medical phenomenon," the official statement read. "Catalepsy combined with an extremely slow heart rate created the appearance of death." While incredibly unusual, similar cases have been documented in medical literature. Miss Monroe is receiving the best care possible at Mount Sinai Medical Center. No mention of foul play, no questions about the rushed autopsy, no acknowledgement that a woman declared legally dead had been hours away from being buried alive. Andre wrote that statement himself, his hands shaking over the keyboard. But this time, he made copies of everything: the original death certificate, the autopsy report, the emails from Leo pushing for a quick private burial. He was done being shut down. I woke up 3 days after the funeral, in an ICU room that cost more per night than most people's mortgages. The first thing I felt was pain, a deep, crushing ache in my chest, like my heart was learning to beat again after forgetting how. The second thing I felt was rage. Because I remembered. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough. I remembered collapsing in my penthouse, the anonymous letter falling from my hands. I remembered the sensation of drowning in my own body, my heart stuttering to a stop, and then darkness. Not the peaceful darkness of sleep, but something heavier, suffocating. But in that darkness, there were whispers. It's done. Make sure the autopsy is handled. She found out about the accounts. We had no choice. Male voices. Familiar. But I couldn't place them through the fog of near death. And then, cutting through everything like a beam of light through storm clouds, another voice. Young. Clear. Impossibly pure. Grace will wake you. I didn't know what it meant then. But the voice repeated it, over and over, like a prayer or a promise. Grace will wake you. Grace will wake you. And somehow, impossibly, I clawed my way back. The machines around me beeped steadily. Monitors tracked my heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels, all the numbers that separated life from death. A nurse noticed my eyes opening and rushed to call the doctor. Within minutes, my room filled with medical staff, all looking at me like I was a ghost they couldn't quite believe in. Miss Monroe, can you hear me? Blink twice if you understand. I blinked. Then I did something that made the doctor step back in surprise. I spoke. Where? My voice was gravel and rust. Where is my daughter? They told me she'd barely left the hospital, that she'd been sleeping in the waiting room, refusing to go home until I woke up, that the media circus outside was so intense they'd had to station security at every entrance. Bring her to me, I said. Now. Danielle entered my room like a woman walking through a dream she couldn't wake from. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her designer clothes rumpled and stained. She'd aged a decade in 3 days. When she saw me, truly saw me, awake and speaking, she collapsed into the chair beside my bed and sobbed so hard I thought she might break. Mama, the word came out strangled. They said you were dead. The doctors, the certificate, everyone said. I know, baby. I reached for her hand with fingers that barely cooperated. But I'm here. I'm here. How? How is this possible? I took a careful breath, my lungs protesting. Because someone tried to make sure I wouldn't be. And because a little girl heard something the rest of you couldn't. Danielle's tears stopped. Her grip on my hand tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying I didn't have a heart attack, Danielle. I was poisoned. The machines around me beeped faster as my heart rate spiked. A nurse moved to intervene, but I waved her off. Before I collapsed, I was investigating financial irregularities. $20 million in offshore accounts I never authorized. And I got a letter warning me I wasn't safe. I locked eyes with my daughter. Someone close to us tried to end me, and they almost succeeded. Danielle's face went white. Who would? I don't know yet. The memories are fragmented, but I heard voices, Danielle, while I was, wherever I was, men discussing my death like it was a business transaction. She stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged animal. This is insane. We need to call the police, the FBI. We need to be careful, I interrupted. Whoever did this has enough power to rush an autopsy, forge documents, and nearly bury me alive. That kind of reach doesn't come from nowhere. A knock at the door made us both jump. A nurse poked her head in, apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Franklin is here. He's insisting on seeing Miss Monroe. Danielle and I exchanged looks. She'd inherited enough of my instincts to feel what I felt, the sudden spike of danger. Let him in, I said. Leo Franklin entered my ICU room with flowers and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked older than he had at the funeral, his silver hair slightly disheveled, his suit jacket wrinkled. He looked like a man who'd seen a ghost. Patricia. His voice carried wonder and something else. Fear, relief, guilt. They're calling it a miracle, a resurrection. Sit down, Leo. He settled into the chair across from my bed, setting the flowers on the side table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Danielle stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching him like he was a snake that might strike. The media attention is intense, Leo said carefully. The board thinks it might be best if you take some time, step back from day-to-day operations while you recover. I'm sure they do. You've been through a trauma, Patricia. No one would blame you for wanting to retire. Enjoy your life while you still, he caught himself, while you have the chance. There it was, hidden beneath concern and corporate speak. A threat? I levered myself up slightly in bed, ignoring the protest of every muscle. Let me be very clear, Leo. I'm not retiring. I'm not stepping back. And I'm not staying silent about what happened to me. His jaw tightened. What happened to you was a medical anomaly, a terrible accident that... Was it? I let the question hang between us, because I remember some interesting things from when I was dead, Leo. Whispers, voices, decisions being made about my empire while my body was still warm. The color drained from his face. You're not thinking clearly. The doctor said there might be neurological effects. My mind is perfectly clear. Clearer than it's been in months. Leo stood, his hands gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles went white. Be careful, Patricia. You've been given a second chance. Don't waste it chasing conspiracy theories that could destroy everything you've built. Is that a warning? It's advice, from someone who cares about your legacy. He left without another word, the flowers forgotten on the table. Danielle rushed to my bedside. Mama, did you hear him? That was a threat, yes. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted, and confirmation that I'm right. What do we do? We find out who tried to kill me, and we make sure they never get another chance. Outside my window, I could see camera crews setting up across the street. The girl who declared me alive had become a sensation. They were calling her a prophet, a miracle child, a voice of God. Grace will wake you. Amara. Her name meant grace. That little girl in a pink dress had heard something divine and refused to stay silent, even when the entire world told her she was wrong. If an 8-year-old could be that brave, then so could I. Call Andre, I told Danielle. Tell him to bring everything he has on Helios Capital and those offshore accounts, and find out where Amara Collins lives. Why? Because I need to thank the child who saved my life, and ask her what else God told her. Elise Collins brought her daughter to the hospital on a Wednesday afternoon, when the media presence had thinned enough to slip through a side entrance. They came because I'd sent a car, a simple sedan, not the usual Monroe Group limousine, and a handwritten note that said only, "Please, I need to understand what your daughter heard." The ICU staff had moved me to a private suite on the top floor. Better security, they said, more privacy. What they meant was, easier to control who gets in and out when a billionaire rises from the dead. Amara entered my room holding her mother's hand, wearing jeans and a yellow sweater instead of the pink funeral dress. She looked like any other 8-year-old, small, uncertain, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, but when her eyes met mine, I saw that same ancient knowing that had pierced through death itself. "Hello, Amara," I said gently. "Thank you for coming." The little girl studied me with an intensity that would have been unsettling if I didn't owe her my life. "You look different than before." "Different than when I was in the casket?" She nodded. "Your light is brighter now. It was very dim before." "Almost gone." Elise shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Miss Monroe. She says strange things sometimes. Ever since she was small, she's been perceptive," I finished. "It's a gift, not a flaw." I gestured to the chairs beside my bed. Elise settled nervously, but Amara walked directly to the window, looking out at Miami's skyline with the unself-conscious curiosity of childhood. "Amara," I said softly, "I need to ask you about the funeral, about what you heard." She turned from the window, her expression serious. "You mean when God told me to speak?" "Yes. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" The little girl came closer, her small hands folding together like she was about to recite something she'd rehearsed. But her words came natural, unpolished, real. Everyone was crying. The man with the cane kept looking at his watch like he wanted it to be over. And the pretty lady who looks like you, my daughter Danielle. She was crying the most. but it didn't feel right. What do you mean? Amara's brow furrowed. Some people were sad you were gone, but some people were happy. I could feel the difference. A chill ran down my spine. 8 years old, and she could read a room better than most adults. And then? I prompted. Then I heard a voice. Not out loud inside. She tapped her chest. It said, "Speak now, or she will be lost." At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, because Mama says I have a big imagination. But the voice got louder and louder until it felt like my whole body was shaking with it. Elise reached for her daughter's hand. She started trembling. I thought she was cold, or scared. I was scared, Amara admitted, but the voice wouldn't stop. It said, "She's still breathing. Tell them. Tell them now, before it's too late." I felt tears prick my eyes. This child, this beautiful, brave child, had been terrified and had spoken anyway. "Did you see anything?" I asked, besides hearing the voice. Amara's face darkened. For the first time, she looked like the frightened 8-year-old she actually was. "There was a shadow," she whispered. "A man, I think, standing on the other side of your casket. He was very tall and had something in his hand, something that looked like a walking stick. But his face," she shuddered. "His face was all wrong, dark, like smoke." My heart rate spiked. The monitors betrayed me, beeping faster. "The man with the cane," I said carefully. "Did he look like the shadow?" Amara nodded slowly. "Same shape, same height, but the shadow was darker, like the bad parts were showing." Leo. She'd seen Leo, or some spiritual representation of him, standing at my casket with guilt or malice radiating off him like heat. "Thank you, Amara." My voice shook. "You saved my life, you know that, don't you?" "God saved your life," she corrected, with the simple certainty of a child's faith. I just said what he told me to say. After Elise and Amara left with a promise of a trust fund that would pay for Amara's education through college, I sat in my hospital bed, staring at nothing, connecting dots I'd been too afraid to connect before. The shadow at my casket, Leo's insistence on a quick burial, the voices I'd heard in that dark place between life and death. "It's done. Make sure the autopsy is handled. She found out about the accounts." I closed my eyes and let myself remember what I'd been trying to forget. 2 weeks before I collapsed, before the anonymous letter, before everything unraveled, I'd been reviewing acquisition targets in the Caribbean legitimate resort properties that Monroe Group had been eyeing for expansion. The Helios Capital accounts were supposedly funding these projects. But when I dug deeper, requesting actual property deeds and development permits, the papers didn't match the narrative. The resort properties were run-down apartment buildings in poor neighborhoods. The development projects were shell companies with no employees, no construction permits, no legitimate business operations. But they had cash flow, millions moving through them monthly. I'd called in a private investigator, someone outside my usual network. He traced the money backward through 3 countries and arrived at a conclusion that made my blood run cold. The Monroe Group's offshore accounts weren't funding resorts. They were laundering money for a trafficking network that moved people, mostly women and children, from Central America through the Caribbean and into the United States. My company, my husband's legacy, being used to profit from human misery, I'd planned to go to the FBI. Had already compiled evidence, made copies, prepared to blow the entire operation apart, even if it meant destroying the Monroe Group in the process. Some things were more important than money. Some evils couldn't be ignored. And then I'd received that letter. "You're not safe in your own empire." 24 hours later, I was dead. Except I wasn't. I reached for my phone, with hands that barely cooperated, and called Andre's cell. He answered on the first ring. "Aunt Patricia, are you okay? I need you to do something for me. Quietly. Without telling anyone, including Danielle." A pause. Then, What do you need? That private investigator I hired 3 weeks ago, Marcus Chen. Find out where he is. And Andre? My voice hardened. If he's missing or dead, that's your answer about whether I'm paranoid. Jesus, Andre's voice dropped to a whisper. You really think... I don't think, Andre. I know. Someone tried to kill me because I discovered the Monroe Group is being used to launder trafficking money. And whoever's behind it has enough power to forge death certificates and rush burials. Leo, it wasn't a question. Maybe, probably, but I need proof before I make accusations. Can you do this? Yes. His voice strengthened. Yes, I'll find Chen. And Aunt Patricia, I still have the original death certificate, the one with the retired pathologist's signature. I've been keeping copies of everything. Good boy. Now listen carefully. I need you to pull every financial record connected to Helios Capital, every wire transfer, every property deed, every name associated with those accounts, but do it from outside the Monroe Group system. Use your personal laptop, a coffee shop's Wi-Fi, anything that can't be traced back to the company. You think they're monitoring internal systems? I think whoever tried to bury me alive isn't going to stop just because a child declared me breathing. They'll try again, Andre, and next time they'll make sure there are no witnesses. After we hung up, I lay back against the pillows, exhausted and electrified in equal measure. Amara had seen a shadow at my casket, a darkness surrounding Leo, and I had seen the truth hiding in my company's accounts. Now I just needed to stay alive long enough to expose it. A nurse came in to check my vitals, her smile professional and warm. She adjusted my IV, made notes on her tablet, asked the standard questions about pain levels and comfort. But as she left, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. On her wrist, barely visible beneath her scrubs, was a small tattoo, 3 interlocking circles. The same symbol I'd seen on documents connected to the trafficking network. The same symbol that had appeared in the Helios Capital files. They weren't just monitoring my company's systems. They were monitoring me. I left Mount Sinai Medical Center 2 weeks after waking from the dead, against my doctor's wishes, and with enough security to invade a small country. Andre had arranged everything. Private exit through the loading dock, decoy vehicles sent to the main entrance to draw the media, a route home that changed 3 times to prevent anyone from following, because by then, we knew the truth. Marcus Chen, the private investigator, was missing. His office had been cleaned out, his apartment lease terminated, his phone disconnected. The man had vanished so completely, it was as if he'd never existed. Except, Andre had found his backup files, hidden in a cloud storage account under his mother's maiden name. Smart man, paranoid man, dead man, probably. The files contained everything I needed: wire transfers, Shell Corporation documents, names and dates and amounts that painted a picture of systematic corruption stretching back 5 years. And at the center of it all, like a spider in a web, Leonard Franklin. My house felt different when I returned. The same marble floors, the same ocean views, the same expensive furniture. But the air itself seemed contaminated, like I could smell the betrayal that had happened within these walls. Rosa, my housekeeper, wept when she saw me. "Señora, I thought everyone said you were..." "I know, Rosa, but I'm here now, and I need you to do something for me." I had her sweep every room for listening devices. We found 3, one in my study, one in my bedroom, one in the private elevator. Someone had been watching, listening, waiting. That night, with Andre and Danielle present, and a security team I'd hired from outside my usual network, I unsealed my will. The document had been locked in my personal safe, the combination known only to me and my attorney, Richard Moss. I'd updated it 3 weeks before my death, right after discovering the trafficking connection. We gathered in my study. Danielle sat rigid in the chair across from my desk, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Andre stood by the window, looking out at the ocean like he could find answers in the waves. Richard Moss opened the envelope with ceremony appropriate for a legal document that controlled billions of dollars. This is the last will and testament of Patricia Eleanor Monroe, executed on. He paused, checking the date. September 15th, 2 days before your cardiac arrest. Read the beneficiaries, I said. Richard's eyes scanned the document, his poker face honed through 40 years of estate law cracked slightly. The primary beneficiary is Danielle Marie Pierce, your daughter. She receives controlling interest in Monroe Group, the Miami estate, and 70% of liquid assets. He cleared his throat. Leonard Franklin, previously named as executor and secondary beneficiary, has been removed entirely. His executor position has been transferred to Andre Whitfield. Danielle's breath caught. You cut Leo out completely? Keep reading, Richard. Board members Marcus Tillman, Jennifer Hawthorne, and David Chen also removed. Their shares in Monroe Group are to be redistributed to a charitable foundation established for. He paused again. For the rescue and rehabilitation of trafficking victims in the Caribbean and Central America. The room fell silent except for the sound of waves against the shore below. There's a note attached, Richard said quietly. Handwritten. Do you want me to read it? Please. He unfolded the paper, and I heard my own words from 3 weeks ago. If you're reading this, I'm either dead or incapacitated. If the latter, and if there are questions about how I came to be in that state, investigate Leonard Franklin and the Helios Capital accounts. Follow the money to the Caribbean. Some secrets are worth dying for, but some truths are worth more than silence. P.M. Danielle stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. You knew, before you collapsed, you knew someone was going to try to kill you. I suspected. And you didn't tell me? You didn't warn anyone? I was gathering evidence. I thought I had time. Time? Her voice rose. You almost died. You almost... She broke off, pressing her hands to her face. When she looked up, her eyes were fierce. We're going to destroy him. Leo, the board members, everyone involved. We're going to burn it all down. Yes, I said simply. We are. Andre turned from the window. I have the documents. Chen's files link Leo directly to a shell corporation called Meridian Holdings. It's registered in the Cayman Islands, same as Helios Capital. And Meridian has been receiving regular wire transfers from known trafficking operations in Mexico and Honduras. How much? Danielle asked. Over the past 5 years, approximately $200 million. The number hung in the air like a guillotine. Leo's been laundering trafficking money through our company, I said, making it real by speaking it aloud, using Monroe Group's legitimate business operations as cover. Those resort properties in the Caribbean, they're way stations, places where people are held before being moved to the next location. Danielle sank back into her chair. How long has this been going on? Since Marcus died. The admission tasted like ash. My husband was ruthless, but he had lines he wouldn't cross. Leo has no such limitations. We need to go to the FBI, Richard said, ever the lawyer. These documents will be dismissed as the paranoid ravings of a woman who suffered significant trauma and possible brain damage, I interrupted. That's what Leo's lawyers will argue. That my resurrection left me mentally unstable, that I'm seeing conspiracies where there are only legitimate business transactions. So what do? Andre asked. We make it public. We force it into the light where Leo can't manipulate the narrative. I pulled out my phone and drafted a message I'd been composing in my head for days. Board meeting. Monroe Group headquarters. Friday, 9 a.m. Attendance mandatory. We're discussing the future of the company and certain offshore accounts that require immediate attention. Patricia Monroe. You're going to confront him? Danielle's voice was equal parts fear and admiration. in front of the entire board. I'm going to give him a chance to explain himself, to tell his version of the story. I smiled without humor, and when he lies, and he will lie, I'm going to produce evidence that destroys him. He'll deny everything, Andre said. Claim the documents are forgeries. Probably, but I'm not doing this for Leo. I'm doing it for everyone else in that room. The board members who've been turning a blind eye. The executives who've profited from looking the other way. I'm going to make them choose. Richard Moss gathered his papers. Patricia, as your attorney, I have to advise. Don't. I held up a hand. Don't tell me to be careful. Don't tell me to protect myself. A little girl had the courage to scream the truth at my funeral when every adult in attendance was prepared to bury me alive. If Amara Collins can be that brave, so can I. After Richard left, Danielle approached my desk. She placed both hands flat on the surface, the same desk where I'd discovered the Helios accounts, where I'd received the threatening letter, where I'd built an empire and watched it become corrupted. Mama! Her voice was steady now, purposeful. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always. Do you think Leo tried to kill you himself, or did he have someone else do it? I thought about the nurse with the tattoo, the rushed autopsy, the forged death certificate, the voices I'd heard in that dark place between life and death. I think Leo gave the order, but he had help, probably from people we see every day, trust every day. Then we can't trust anyone. We can trust each other, and Andre, and apparently an 8-year-old prophet named Amara. I stood feeling strength return to legs that had forgotten how to carry me. Leo thought he could silence me, bury the evidence with my body, but here's what he didn't account for. What? I'm not the woman I was 3 weeks ago. I've been to the edge of death and back. I've heard God speak through a child's voice, and I've seen the darkness that lives in people I called family. I walked to the window looking out at my empire. I may have been silenced, but I'm not staying silent anymore. Danielle joined me at the window. For the first time in years, she slipped her hand into mine. Not the formal gesture of a daughter to a powerful mother, but the simple need of one woman seeking strength from another. What if he tries again? She whispered. What if next time? Then at least I'll die on my feet instead of in a casket. I squeezed her hand. But I don't plan on dying, darling. I plan on living long enough to watch Leo Franklin answer for every life he's destroyed. Below us, the ocean crashed against the shore, relentless and inevitable. Friday was 2 days away. And Leonard Franklin had no idea that the woman he'd tried to bury was about to resurrect his worst nightmare. Friday morning arrived with the kind of brutal Miami sunshine that makes everything look either beautiful or damning, depending on what you're hiding. I chose my armor carefully. A white suit, the color of resurrection, of new beginnings, of truth that refuses to stay buried. My hair pulled back severely. Minimal jewelry except for the wedding ring Marcus gave me 30 years ago. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a woman who'd walked through death and come back with purpose. The Monroe Group headquarters occupied 47 floors of prime downtown real estate, a glass and steel monument to my late husband's ambition and my expansion of it. I'd built empires in this building, made decisions that shaped cities, commanded rooms full of men who thought money made them gods. Today, I was going to tear it all down. Andre had done his work perfectly. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the executive conference room on the top floor. But what Leo and the other board members didn't know was that we'd also invited guests. Reporters from the Miami Herald, Wall Street Journal, and CNN, an FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes, and sitting quietly in the back row, a nervous woman in a modest dress holding the hand of an 8-year-old girl in pink. Elise and Amara Collins, my witnesses, my prophets. I arrived at 8:45, flanked by security. The lobby erupted in whispers as I walked through employees who'd mourned my death, who'd watched the viral video, who couldn't quite believe I was flesh and blood instead of ghost. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending to judgment. Leo was already in the conference room when I arrived, sitting at the head of the table like he belonged there. He'd aged another decade since our hospital confrontation, his silver hair thinner, his eyes carrying the weight of a man who knew his world was crumbling but didn't know how fast. When I entered, conversation stopped mid-sentence. "Patricia," Leo stood, his cane clicking against marble. His smile was carved from ice. "You should be resting. We could have postponed." "Sit down, Leo." The other board members filed in. Marcus Tillman, Jennifer Hawthorne, David Chen, the three I'd cut from my will. They looked between Leo and me like children watching parents fight, uncertain which side would win. And then the reporters entered. Leo's face went from pale to ashen. "What is this? This is a private board meeting." "This is a public reckoning," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "And everyone here is going to hear exactly what the Monroe Group has become." I moved to the front of the room, Andre distributing folders to every seat. Inside, wire transfers, Shell Corporation documents, property deeds. Marcus Chen's complete investigation, compiled and annotated. "3 weeks ago, I collapsed in my penthouse," I began. "I was declared dead, autopsied, prepared for burial, and I would have been buried alive if not for a child who heard God tell her I was still breathing." Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled notes. What I didn't know then, what I only discovered afterward, was that my collapse wasn't natural. It was orchestrated. Because I discovered something that certain people desperately wanted to keep hidden. I opened my folder, projecting documents onto the screen behind me. For the past 5 years, the Monroe Group has been used to launder money for a human trafficking network operating from Mexico through the Caribbean into the United States. Over $200 million has moved through our offshore accounts, facilitated by shell corporations and fake resort properties. Gasps erupted. Jennifer Hawthorne stood. "That's absurd! Patricia, you've been through trauma." "Sit down and look at the evidence," I snapped. "Every wire transfer is documented. Every property deed. Every name associated with Meridian Holdings and Helios Capital shell companies that exist solely to move dirty money through clean channels." Leo remained perfectly still, his hands folded on his cane, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the desperate search for an exit strategy. "This is fabricated," he said calmly. "Patricia has suffered significant neurological trauma. The doctors warned her family that she might experience paranoia, false memories." "Then explain this." Andre stepped forward, pulling up a new document. "This is the death certificate filed 3 days before the funeral, signed by Dr. Raymond Chen, a pathologist who retired 8 months ago. A forgery, in other words. And this, another document appeared, is the approval for expedited burial, bypassing the mandatory waiting period, signed by Leonard Franklin, chairman of the Monroe Group Board." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Board members turned to Leo with expressions ranging from shock to dawning horror. "You rushed her burial," Danielle said, standing from where she'd been sitting silently. Her voice shook, but held. "You forged documents. You tried to bury my mother alive because she discovered what you were doing." "That's insane!" Leo's composure finally cracked. "I loved Patricia. I loved Marcus. Everything I've done has been to protect this company." "You've been protecting yourself," I interrupted, "and profiting from human misery. The evidence is irrefutable, Leo. We have your name on documents, your signatures authorizing transfers, your connections to organizations that traffic in human beings." Leo's face twisted. "You stupid woman. You have no idea what you're interfering with. These people, the network, they're bigger than you, bigger than this company. You should have stayed dead." The words hung in the air like a confession. Cameras captured everything. The FBI agent in the corner moved forward, speaking into his radio. And then, cutting through the chaos like a bell, A small voice spoke from the back of the room. God said to tell the truth now. Every head turned. Amara Collins stood on her chair, her pink dress bright against the corporate grays and blacks surrounding her. She pointed directly at Leo with the same certainty she'd shown at my funeral. He's the shadow, the dark one. God said the truth would make people free, and lies keep them in chains. Leo stared at the little girl like she was a demon. Get that child out of here. No. I moved to stand beside Amara, placing my hand on her small shoulder. She saved my life once by speaking truth. She gets to be here when justice happens. Danielle stepped forward, holding a final document. Her hands shook, but her voice was steel. This is an affidavit from the funeral director. He was paid $50,000 by Leonard Franklin to expedite the burial and not ask questions about irregularities in the death certificate. He's willing to testify in exchange for immunity. She placed the document on the table in front of Leo. And this is a wire transfer from your personal account to a clinic in the Cayman Islands, dated 2 days before my mother collapsed. The clinic has been flagged by Interpol for providing poisons disguised as medical treatments. The FBI agent approached Leo. Mr. Franklin, I need you to come with me. This is a setup. Leo tried to stand, stumbled. Patricia, you're making a mistake. These people, they'll come for you. They'll come for your daughter. You think you're safe because you're alive? You're not. You're just under arrest, the agent finished. Leonard Franklin, you're being detained for questioning regarding financial crimes, conspiracy, and attempted murder. They led him away in handcuffs, his cane clattering to the floor. The board members sat in stunned silence. Marcus Tillman broke first. We didn't know, he said, his voice hollow. Patricia, I swear we didn't know the extent. You knew enough. I looked at each of them in turn. You saw the irregularities, the rushed decisions, the accounts that didn't quite add up, and you looked away because it was profitable. Jennifer Hawthorne's carefully maintained composure crumbled. What happens now? Now? I gestured to Andre. Now my nephew becomes acting chairman. We cooperate fully with federal investigators. We dismantle every corrupt system Leo built. And we establish the Grace Foundation named for the child whose courage saved not just my life, but the lives of everyone trapped in the network Leo helped run. I turned to the cameras, to the reporters documenting everything, to the world watching a billionaire dismantle her own empire in the name of justice. The Monroe Group will survive this, but it will be reborn. No more secrets, no more looking away. And anyone who profited from human trafficking will answer for it. The reporters erupted with questions, but I was done talking. I walked to the back of the room where Amara stood with her mother. The little girl looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much and somehow remained pure. You did good, I told her. Twice now, you've spoken truth when everyone else was silent. Will the bad people go to jail? She asked. Yes, sweetheart. They will. Good. She slipped her small hand into mine. God said you're not done yet. He said you have more work to do. I smiled through tears I didn't try to hide. Then I'd better get started. Outside the conference room windows, Miami stretched out in all directions, beautiful, corrupt, full of secrets and second chances. I'd been dead for 3 days. Buried. Finished. But God had sent a child to declare otherwise. And now, alive and furious and finally free, I was going to make sure that grace, amazing, impossible, prophetic grace changed everything. 6 months after my resurrection, I stood in the gardens of my Miami estate and watched Amara Collins cut the ribbon on a building that would save lives. The Grace Foundation headquarters rose 3 stories high, modern glass and steel, softened by tropical landscaping, designed to feel less like an institution and more like a sanctuary. Inside were counseling rooms, legal offices, medical facilities, and living quarters for survivors who needed safe harbor while they rebuilt their shattered lives. Amara's small hands struggled with the oversized scissors, and Danielle knelt to help her. The cameras loved it, the billionaire heiress and the prophet child working together to create something beautiful from ashes. But I knew the real story wasn't in the photo opportunity. It was in the 53 women and children we'd already pulled from trafficking networks in the 6 months since Leo's arrest. 53 lives freed because a little girl refused to stay silent. The applause was genuine. Not the polite golf claps of corporate events, but real emotion from people who understood what this building represented. Hope, second chances, the stubborn audacity of grace. Mama. Danielle appeared at my elbow, her phone in hand. Andre just texted. The DOJ secured convictions on 8 more defendants in the trafficking network. They're calling it the largest human trafficking prosecution in South Florida history. Good. I watched Amara pose for photos with the foundation staff, her smile bright and unguarded. But it's not enough. It'll never be enough. I know. Danielle slipped her arm through mine, a gesture that had become natural in the months since my return. We'd rebuilt more than just the company. We'd rebuilt us. But it's something, and something is where we start. The Monroe Group had survived, barely. We'd lost investors, contracts, board members who resigned rather than face investigation. Our stock had plummeted. Our reputation had taken hits that would take years to repair. But we were clean, finally, brutally, honestly clean. Andre had become the youngest chairman in the company's history, and under his leadership, we'd implemented transparency measures that made us the most scrutinized real estate company in America. Every transaction documented, every account monitored, every decision made in the light instead of the shadows. It was harder this way, less profitable, more complicated. It was also the only way I could sleep at night. Leo Franklin was awaiting trial in federal prison, his empire dismantled, his legacy destroyed. The 3 board members who'd enabled him had taken plea deals in exchange for testimony. The nurse with the tattoo, whose name was Rebecca Santos, had confessed to injecting me with a slow-acting cardiac toxin in exchange for $20,000. She'd been a single mother desperate for money to pay medical bills. Leo had exploited that desperation, turned her into an unwitting murderer, and then tried to bury the evidence. Some days I hated her. Most days I pitied her. Justice, I'd learned, was more complicated than I'd imagined when I was just a billionaire playing God with business deals. Mrs. Monroe, a young woman approached hesitantly. She was maybe 19, with haunted eyes and healing scars on her wrists. I wanted to thank you. I was in one of the houses, in the Caribbean, and when they raided it after the arrests. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. I took her hands gently. What's your name? Maria. Maria, you don't owe me thanks. You owe yourself gratitude for surviving, for being brave enough to testify, for choosing to live. The counselors here helped me understand that. She glanced at the Grace Foundation building. They said I could start college next semester if I wanted. That there's funding for survivors who, tears spilled over. I never thought I'd get to have a normal life. You get to have whatever life you build, I told her, and we'll help you build it. After she left, I found a quiet corner of the garden, away from the celebration. The sun was setting, painting the Miami sky in shades of gold and fire. This had been Marcus's favorite spot. We'd planned our empire here decades ago, dreaming of buildings and legacies, of wealth that would outlast us. We'd built the buildings, created the wealth, but the legacy, that had almost been purchased with blood money and buried bodies. I heard footsteps behind me. Amara appeared, still clutching a piece of ribbon from the ceremony. Are you sad? She asked with the directness only children possess. Not sad. Thoughtful. About what? I considered how to explain complex adult emotions to an 8-year-old prophet. About how I almost let everything become corrupted because I wasn't paying attention. About how many people suffered while I built my empire. Amara sat beside me on the garden bench, her small legs swinging. But you didn't know, and when you found out, you fixed it. I tried to fix it. You did fix it. God said so. Despite everything, I smiled. God told you that too? Not in words this time, but I can feel it. The darkness around you is gone. You're all light now. She tilted her head. Well, mostly light. Everyone has a little shadow. That's normal. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. Amara, do you understand what you did? At the funeral? She considered this seriously. I listened when God spoke, and I said what needed to be said, even though I was scared. That's all? That's everything. She looked at me with those ancient, knowing eyes. Grown-ups make things complicated, but God's voice is simple. He just needs people brave enough to listen. I pulled her into a hug, this extraordinary child who'd saved my life and changed my legacy. Promise me something. What? Promise you'll keep listening. Keep speaking, even when people tell you you're wrong or you're too young or you don't understand. The world needs voices like yours. I promise. She hugged me back fiercely. And you promise to keep fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. Deal. Later, after the celebration ended and the guests departed, I sat alone in my garden as stars appeared over Miami. Danielle and Andre were inside, making plans for the foundation's expansion. Elise had taken Amara home, but not before I'd transferred $5 million into a trust fund that would ensure the child never wanted for anything. Money couldn't repay what she'd given me, but it could give her choices. I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The ambition that built an empire, the greed that corrupted it, the courage that destroyed it, the grace that rebuilt it. They'd tried to bury me. Literally. Physically put me in a box and lower me into the ground while my heart still whispered its stubborn rhythm. But Grace Impossible, prophetic 8-year-old Grace, had raised me. Because sometimes the smallest voice speaks the loudest truth. Sometimes a child's faith is stronger than an adult's fear. Sometimes you have to die to understand what's worth living for. I'd spent 63 years building wealth, accumulating power, commanding rooms full of people who feared and respected me. I'd thought that was success. That was legacy. But my real legacy wouldn't be buildings or bank accounts. It would be Maria and the 52 others like her, getting second chances at normal lives. It would be the trafficking networks dismantled because I refused to stay silent. It would be Danielle, finally understanding that power means nothing if you don't use it for good. It would be Amara, learning that listening to God and speaking truth matters more than pleasing powerful people. I pulled out my phone and recorded a message not for social media or press releases, but for myself. A reminder for days when the temptation to go back to the old ways would inevitably whisper, "My name is Patricia Eleanor Monroe. I died on September 18th and came back to life on September 21st because a child heard God and refused to stay silent. I wasted 40 years building an empire on ambition and pride. I almost wasted the rest of my life staying dead in all the ways that matter. But Grace, amazing, terrifying, inconvenient Grace, gave me another chance. And I will not waste it. They tried to bury me. But you can't bury truth. You can't silence justice. And you can't kill someone who's protected by a voice greater than power or money or fear. Grace raised me. And now I live to raise others. I saved the recording and stood, feeling strength in legs that had forgotten how to walk, in a heart that had stopped and started and chosen to keep beating. The garden glowed softly in landscape lighting. Inside, I could hear Danielle's laugh, genuine now, not the practiced social grace she'd worn like armor for years. My empire was smaller, my reputation more complicated, my bank account significantly reduced after settlements and restitution. But I was alive. Really, truly, purposefully alive. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. I walked back toward the house, toward my daughter and my nephew, and the work that would define whatever years I had left. Behind me, a whisper seemed to ride the wind, soft, childlike, impossible to verify but impossible to dismiss. Well done. I smiled and kept walking, because the smallest voices, I'd learned, speak the loudest truth. And grace, once it finds you, never lets you go.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.